The air in the grand ballroom shimmered, thick with the promise of new beginnings and the intoxicating perfume of white lilies, expensive champagne, and meticulously polished dreams. Light from 100 flickering candles and dazzling chandeliers danced across polished marble floors, illuminating smiling faces and reflecting in the crystal glasses that chimed with each toast. This wasn't just a celebration. It was an edifice, carefully constructed, stone by deliberate stone, built on the foundation of hard-won peace and the quiet burying of the past. Michael stood at the heart of it all, the architect of this moment, the recipient of 1,000 warm glances and heartfelt wishes. He felt the weight of his suit, perfectly tailored, a physical manifestation of the man he had become, solid, confident, ready. On his arm, Emily, his wife, his radiant bride, the embodiment of his future, glowed with a happiness so pure it seemed to cast its own light. Her hand in his was a promise, a connection that felt unbreakable, a confirmation that the storms were behind him, and only clear skies lay ahead. He had chosen this life, chosen her, deliberately and with every fiber of his being, leaving the wreckage of his first marriage behind like a distant, faded photograph. He had buried that past deep, packed it away in a box labeled Lessons Learned, confident it could no longer touch him, no longer threaten the carefully constructed happiness he now held in his hands. He looked around the room, a sense of profound gratitude washing over him. Every face here represented a thread in the tapestry of his life. His beaming parents, Emily's joyful family, friends who had seen him at his lowest and celebrated his rise, colleagues who respected him. This was his world, vibrant and secure. The band played a slow, classic melody, and couples drifted onto the dance floor, swaying gently under the glittering lights. Michael squeezed Emily's hand, a silent vow, a heartfelt acknowledgement of the perfect, unbreakable reality they were forging together. Everything was in its place. The past was contained. The future was here, now, radiant and full of promise. And then, with the sudden, brutal force of an unexpected earthquake, a fissure ripped through the carefully laid foundation of his perfect world. His gaze, sweeping across the room in contented survey, snagged on a figure standing just inside the grand, arched entrance to the ballroom, partially obscured by a towering arrangement of lilies and greenery. A woman. She wasn't mingling, wasn't dressed for a celebration. She wore a simple, dark dress, a stark contrast to the vibrant joy surrounding her. Her face was pale, her eyes wider, darker than he remembered, and fixed with an unwavering, chilling intensity across the room, directly on him. Sarah, his ex-wife. Sarah, here, now, on his wedding day. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through him. Surprise, confusion, a sudden, violent tearing of the veil between the buried past and the vibrant present. For years of silence, for years of deliberate distance, for years of moving on, shattered in an instant by her unexpected presence. But it wasn't just her that froze him, turning the joyful sounds of the reception into a distant, distorted hum in his ears and seizing the breath in his lungs. The air grew thin, cold, impossible to inhale. A heavy dread began to pool in his stomach, a premonition of disaster. In her arms, nestled against her shoulder, swaddled in a soft blue blanket, was a baby. A baby. Michael's mind seized, grasping desperately for logic, for understanding. Sarah, a baby. Here, now. Had she remarried? Found someone else? Found happiness he hadn't known about? The questions were frantic, chaotic, unwelcome intrusions into the sanctity of the moment, sparking a brief, sharp pang in his chest. Not jealousy, but a bewildering sense of detachment from a life that had once been so intimately intertwined with his own. But then, the baby stirred in her arms, a tiny hand emerging from the confines of the blanket, waving aimlessly into the air. The baby's head shifted, turning slightly, bringing its face into clearer, horrifying view. The light from the nearest chandelier, diffused by the distance and the floral screen, fell upon the infant features, illuminating them with an almost ethereal glow, a spotlight on an impossible truth. And the world fell utterly silent. The music ceased to exist. The laughter died. The murmur of conversation evaporated, replaced by a deafening roar in his own head. The sound of his blood rushing, his heart hammering against his ribs, the frantic scream of denial in his mind. The baby had his eyes, the exact, deep-set shape, the same dark intensity he saw in his own reflection every morning. The curve of the cheek, the set of the jaw, the tiny mouth, even the way the baby's eyebrows furrowed slightly in a fleeting expression, it was an uncanny, impossible echo of his own features. A miniature, perfect replica staring back at him from the arms of the woman he had left behind, the woman he had divorced, the woman from his past. It looked just like him. Utter, paralyzing shock consumed him, seizing his limbs, stealing his voice. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. He hadn't been with Sarah. Not for years. Not since the divorce was final. Not since that last night. No, that couldn't be right. He would know. He would remember. He would never have forgotten. He wouldn't have built this life, this future with Emily, planned this wedding, if there was even the slightest doubt, the faintest possibility. The idea was monstrous, a reflection of a man he didn't believe himself to be. Oblivious? Careless? So lost in his own pain, he could erase a night that created a life. Emily turned to him, her radiant smile melting away like ice in a hot drink, replaced by a look of concern that swiftly morphed into confusion, then alarm, then dawning, terrible horror as her gaze followed the rigid line of his own. She saw Sarah. She saw the baby. She saw the horrifying, undeniable resemblance. Her own face paled, the vibrant color draining away, leaving behind a canvas of fear and disbelief. "Michael? What is it? You're shaking. You're pale as a ghost. Are you ill?" He couldn't answer. He could only stare at Sarah, standing there, still, silent, a stark figure of disruption, holding the baby, letting him see, letting everyone see. He could feel the shift in the room's energy, a palpable tension replacing the earlier joy, spreading outwards like a dark stain on white linen. The laughter died. The conversations faded. Heads turned, a ripple effect of shock and curiosity, following his gaze, following Emily's widening eyes, landing on the figure by the door. They saw Sarah. They saw the baby. They saw the likeness. And the whispers began, a low, insidious tide rising through the shocked crowd, growing louder, faster, a venomous hum of speculation. He saw his mother gasp, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide with alarm and confusion. His father's cheerful expression dissolved into a mask of bewildered apprehension, then a flicker of something akin to anger and protectiveness. Emily's hand, which had been a comforting presence on his arm, tightened painfully, her fingers digging into his suit jacket, her grip desperate, her eyes, wide with fear and confusion, darting from Sarah to the baby, then back to Michael, filled with a terrible, unspoken question that clawed at his sanity. Who is that, Michael?" Emily's voice was a trembling whisper, barely audible above the growing murmur of shocked voices. Yet to him, it sounded like a cry from across an infinite chasm. And is that her baby?" He swallowed, his throat dry as dust, his mouth suddenly tasting of ash. It's Sarah," he managed, the name feeling alien, foreign, on his tongue after years of disuse. The second question, the terrifying question that was the very core of this nightmare, hung in the air between them, vast and heavy. He couldn't voice it. He couldn't confirm the terrifying possibility that was solidifying before his eyes, hardening into an undeniable, horrifying reality. Sarah took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another, her dark dress a stark contrast against the opulent, celebrating backdrop. The crowd parted before her, a silent, unwilling sea, creating an aisle that led her towards them, towards the center of the ruined celebration. She wasn't walking with confidence or defiance, but with a heavy, deliberate tread, like someone fulfilling a grim, unavoidable duty. Her expression remained fixed, unreadable, a deep, settled sadness, perhaps a grim determination, or something else entirely, something he couldn't decipher, something that spoke of years of burden and a final, desperate act. He had to move. He had to get closer. He had to understand. He gently, reluctantly, released Emily's hand, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. "Stay here, Emily," he murmured, his voice hoarse, a promise he already knew, deep down, he couldn't keep, not truly. I just need to." He couldn't finish the sentence. There were no words in his vocabulary, no coherent thoughts in his mind, for the maelstrom of fear, confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror that was consuming him, stripping away his composure, his carefully constructed calm. He walked towards Sarah, the distance feeling immense, each step bringing the impossible closer, sharpening the features of the baby in her arms, deepening the chilling, sickening sense of recognition. The air between them was thick with their shared history, the ghosts of their broken marriage, the unresolved pain, the silent years, and the terrifying, undeniable reality of the child she held. The sounds of the reception, the distant music, the rising tide of whispers, it all faded, the world shrinking to just the two of them, and the small, blanketed form that lay between them. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the faint, downy hair on the baby's head, the perfect curve of its cheek, the tiny fingers curled against the blue blanket. Leo. Sarah had said his name was Leo outside in the park, hadn't she? Just seconds ago. His mind felt scrambled, fragmented, unable to hold onto coherent thoughts. 8 months old. The timeline was wrong. It had to be wrong. He hadn't seen her in 4 years. The divorce was final. It couldn't be. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes holding his, conveying a silent message he still couldn't fully decipher. Regret? Accusation? A desperate plea for understanding? A grim acceptance of the chaos she had just unleashed? "Hello, Michael," she said softly, her voice low and steady, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the room, clear and undeniable. What are you doing here, Sarah?" The question was ridiculous, irrelevant in the face of the terrifying reality she held in her arms. The real question, the terrifying question, hovered unspoken between them, screaming in his mind. Why are you here? And the baby? Whose baby is this?" "This is Leo," she said again, her voice softening just slightly as she looked down at the child, gently stroking his head. Her expression held a deep, complex blend of love for the child and sorrow for the circumstances. "He's 8 months old, and he's your son, Michael." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs, making the world spin violently. Your son, the baby in Sarah's arms, the one who looked exactly like him, was his son. Impossible. Utterly, completely impossible. 8 months old. Their divorce was final 4 years ago. They couldn't have. Not since he moved out. Not since the lawyers. Not since that last night. 8 months, he repeated, the words hollow, disbelieving, a desperate plea for logic in a moment that defied it. His voice was strained, barely a whisper, thick with shock. "Sarah, that's not possible. We haven't been together. Not in years. Not since we separated. Not since the divorce." A faint, sad smile touched her lips, gone in an instant, but it held a world of pain and irony. "Not like we were, no," she conceded, her gaze fixed on him, unwavering, challenging him to deny the truth. "But, Michael, do you truly remember every single detail of that last year? The chaos? The fights? The pain? The moments when we tried, one last time, desperately, to salvage something from the wreckage? To say goodbye, properly, irrevocably?" He did remember that last night. Or at least, he thought he did. The night before she signed the papers. She had come to his apartment, unannounced, driven by some desperate need for closure, a final, raw farewell to the marriage that had consumed them. They had talked for hours sitting on the floor, surrounded by the packing boxes that symbolized the end, raw and emotional, saying goodbye to everything they had been, everything they had lost. They had cried, fueled by too much cheap wine and years of accumulated pain and disappointment. It was painful, necessary closure. A final, raw farewell. But that was all. A conversation. Tears. A sad embrace at the end. He had left before dawn, escaping the memory of the tears, the finality. Yes, I remember that night, he said slowly, a cold dread beginning to seep into his bones, chilling him from the inside out, a horrifying realization dawning amidst the chaos. It was difficult. We talked. We cried. We said goodbye. That was it, Sarah. Nothing else happened. I left before dawn, I swear. She shook her head, her eyes searching his, perhaps seeing the uncertainty he tried desperately to hide behind a facade of disbelief, an uncertainty that was a betrayal of Emily, of their future. "Are you sure, Michael?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the sudden, charged silence of the ballroom, a question that pierced him to the core. "Are you absolutely 100% certain that after hours of tears and wine, after saying goodbye to everything, after the raw pain and vulnerability, nothing else happened? Or is it just easier to convince yourself you don't remember? It was one night, Michael. One mistake, fueled by pain and alcohol. A moment of weakness at the absolute end. But it happened. And Leo is the result." No. The denial roared in his head, a desperate, primal scream against the encroaching reality, against the possibility that he could be so oblivious, so careless, so fundamentally unaware of his own life. He couldn't have forgotten. He wouldn't have built this life, this future with Emily, planned this wedding, if there was even the slightest doubt, the faintest possibility of this. The idea was monstrous, a reflection of a man he didn't believe himself to be. A man who could erase a night that created a life? "You're lying," he whispered, the accusation weak, lacking conviction, crumbling under the undeniable visual evidence of Leo's face, under the quiet, resolute certainty in Sarah's eyes. "You're lying, Sarah. You have to be. Why would you do this? Why would you come here now on my wedding day and say something like this? To ruin everything? To cause this kind of pain?" Her expression hardened, the sadness replaced by a quiet, burning pain, a flicker of righteous anger beneath the surface. "Ruin your wedding? Michael, look at him." She held Leo slightly forward, adjusting the blue blanket, just enough for Michael to see his face clearly, the tiny features, the dark eyes blinking slowly, looking out at the strange, silent room with innocent curiosity. "He looks like you, Michael. He is you, miniature. An undeniable fact. I came because I saw the announcement. I saw your picture, Emily's picture. I saw you were starting a new family, building a future. And I couldn't let you do that without knowing about the son you already have, the family you already created, even if you didn't know it existed." The word son landed like a physical blow, stealing his breath again, stronger this time, stripping away the last vestiges of his denial, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He looked at Leo's face, saw the undeniable, irrefutable resemblance, the echo of his own features, and felt his carefully constructed world crumble around him, collapsing into dust and debris at his feet. Emily gasped softly beside him, a small, broken sound, her hand still clamped painfully onto his arm, her grip now desperate, pleading. "Michael, is she telling the truth?" Her voice was a raw, pleading whisper, filled with a pain that mirrored the agony in his own chest. He looked at Emily, his heart twisting, a searing agony for the pain reflected in her eyes, for the devastation he had, however unknowingly, inflicted upon her. His radiant bride, his perfect day, their perfect beginning, shattered into a million sharp pieces by a secret he hadn't known he was keeping. I don't know, Emily," he stammered, his voice ragged, thick with shock and confusion, the truth feeling impossibly far away, buried under layers of denial and a terrifying self-doubt. "I don't understand. It can't be." Sarah stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Michael, then briefly, sadly, on Emily, a silent acknowledgement of the woman whose life she had just irrevocably changed. "He deserves to know who his father is, Michael." she said, her voice gaining a quiet strength, a steel hidden beneath the weariness. And you deserve to know you have a son. I carried this secret for 8 months because I was scared, I was lost, I was drowning in my own life after the divorce. I didn't know how to tell you when to tell you, but I can't carry it anymore. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to keep pretending he doesn't exist. I had to tell you. I had to bring him to you. You were drowning? Emily's father, having rushed forward with his wife, his face a mask of outrage and disbelief, interjected, his voice sharp, cold, laced with accusation. And your solution is to create a scene like this? On their wedding day? At our daughter's wedding? This is unconscionable. Sarah, this is a calculated attack. What do you want? Money? To destroy his reputation? To ruin his life? Arthur, please. Emily cried, reaching out a hand towards her father, her face contorted in pain. But her father ignored her, his focus solely on Sarah, his face red with anger, his body rigid with protective fury. I didn't mean it like this, Sarah cried, tears finally streaming down her face, her voice thick with anguish, rising slightly, desperation overriding control. I didn't know how else to tell him. After 4 years of silence, would you have believed me if I just called? Sent a letter? I thought, seeing Leo, seeing how much he looks like you, it would be undeniable. It would force you to face the truth, to listen, to understand. I gambled, Michael. I made a terrible, desperate gamble on your wedding day. I didn't anticipate. I didn't want to cause such a scene. I just wanted you to see him, to know, before you build a whole new life, a whole new family, without him. The truth, Emily echoed, her voice choked with tears, laced with bitter pain and anger, looking from Sarah to the baby, then back to Michael. The truth is, you just destroyed our wedding and possibly our marriage. Sarah, if this is true, Michael somehow forgot he slept with his ex-wife right before marrying me. He was building a future with me, promising forever, while potentially having a child with you. What kind of truth is that? What kind of foundation does that leave us with? The room, already hushed, now erupted into a full-blown cacophony of shocked whispers, gasps, and exclamations. Guests pointed, heads shook in disbelief, faces twisted in judgment or pity. The scene was raw, exposed, devastatingly public. Michael felt like he was standing naked under 1,000 spotlights, his deepest secrets, even the ones he hadn't known he was keeping, laid bare for the world to see. Every whisper was a judgment, every stare a condemnation. We need to talk, Sarah, Michael said, his voice firm, cutting through the rising tide of noise and speculation, a new resolve hardening his gaze. Away from here. Now, this isn't the place. We can't do this here. He was acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes fixed on them, the utter devastation of the moment, the irreversible damage to the day, to his life, to Emily's life. Sarah looked around at the wreckage of the celebration, the horrified faces, the utter devastation she had wrought. A flicker of genuine remorse, profound and undeniable, crossed her face, visible amidst the tears. She nodded, tears still falling freely now. She tightened her grip on Leo, as if protecting him from the fallout. All right, I'll wait outside, by the fountain. I brought the stroller. We can go there. She turned and walked away, a solitary figure. The blue blanket of the baby a stark contrast against her dark dress, carrying the weight of a secret and the burden of its explosive revelation. The crowd parted before her, a silent, unwilling sea, their eyes following her until she disappeared through the grand entrance. The silence she left behind was heavier than the earlier noise. Emily turned to Michael, her face a mask of anguish, pain, and profound, devastating betrayal. Her perfect wedding, her perfect dream, the future she had so carefully envisioned, lay in ruins around her, shattered into irreparable pieces. Michael, how could this happen? She whispered, her voice broken, thick with unshed tears. How could you on our wedding day with her? Her voice broke, and she couldn't speak anymore, only sobbed silently, her body racked with pain, tears streaming down her face, blurring her vision of him, of everything. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly, fiercely, but he knew his embrace, however strong, couldn't mend the deep, gaping wound that had just been inflicted upon her heart, upon their future. He could feel her trembling, her body racked with sobs, burying her face in his shoulder, muffling her cries against his suit. "I don't know, Emily," he whispered, his voice raw with despair, holding her as if she might shatter into a million pieces. "I swear I didn't know. If this is true, if that baby is mine, I had no idea, not the slightest idea." She pulled back from his embrace, her face streaked with tears, her eyes searching his face desperately for answers he didn't possess, for a certainty that had evaporated, replaced by a terrifying self-doubt. Michael, look at him. You said it yourself. He looks just like you. The resemblance is undeniable. How could you not know if you were potentially a father? How could you be with me, planning a future, promising forever, while there was even the slightest chance of this? What kind of man are you, Michael? What kind of man could forget something like that? Her words were like jagged shards of glass, piercing him, twisting his gut, a brutal reflection of the man he feared he might be. What kind of man was he? A man who could forget a moment that created a life. A man whose past was so unknown to him, even to himself, that it could explode into his present and destroy his future. A man who had, however unintentionally, built his life with Emily on a foundation of sand, a foundation that had just crumbled beneath their feet. His parents were beside him, their faces a mixture of alarm, concern, and a dawning, horrified understanding that the situation was far more serious, far more devastating than they had initially grasped. His mother's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock and worry. His father's jaw was set, his expression grim. "Michael, son," his father urged, his voice low and grave, his hand resting on Michael's shoulder. "You have to go talk to her. Talk to Sarah. Find out for sure. Every single detail. Well, we'll try and manage things here. We'll talk to the guests, try and salvage something." The word manage felt painfully inadequate, a futile attempt to impose order on utter chaos. There was nothing left to manage. The wedding was over. The dream was shattered. Michael said, his jaw set with a grim, desperate determination, the initial shock giving way to a cold, hard resolve. He had to understand. He had to face the truth, whatever it was, no matter how painful, no matter how devastating. He had to face Sarah. He had to face the possibility that his life, the life he thought he knew, was a lie. Emily looked at him, her gaze filled with pain and a terrible, heartbreaking uncertainty, the tears still streaming down her face. I can't do this right now, Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling, broken, her eyes pleading for him to understand, to let her escape this nightmare, if only for a moment. "I can't be here. Not like this. I need to go." She turned and hurried away, a blur of white disappearing into the stunned, whispering crowd, her parents following close behind her, casting one last, long, pained look at Michael before they went, a look filled with anger, disappointment, and a profound sadness for their daughter. The ballroom, moments ago a vibrant, joyous celebration of love and new beginnings, was now a scene of utter devastation. The music had stopped entirely. The air was heavy with the scent of wilting lilies and shattered dreams. Guests awkwardly began to disperse, offering hushed condolences as they left, averting their gaze, or simply hurrying away, unable or unwilling to bear witness to the public disintegration of a marriage before it had even truly begun. The wedding party, unsure of what to do, stood in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the shock and confusion that had swept through the room. Michael stood alone in the center of the room, the eye of the storm, surrounded by the wreckage of his perfect day. The champagne flute lay forgotten on a nearby table, the bubbles long since gone flat. He felt utterly exposed, raw, his heart a raw, aching wound in his chest. He walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the ruined flowers, the half-eaten cake, the lingering scent of a dream that had turned into a nightmare. He stepped out into the cool night air, finding Sarah by the large stone fountain in the courtyard. The sound of the water was a soft, continuous murmur in the quiet night, a stark contrast to the silent, screaming chaos he had left behind. Leo was asleep in her arms, nestled in his stroller beside her, utterly innocent and unaware of the seismic shift he had just caused in the lives of the people who stood before him. Sarah sat on the edge of the fountain, her shoulders slumped, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. She looked small and alone in the vast, empty space, a figure of profound sadness and weary burden. "The truth, Sarah," Michael said, his voice low, devoid of the earlier panic, replaced now by a cold, heavy resolve that came from hitting rock bottom and having nowhere else to go but forward. He sat beside her on the edge of the fountain, maintaining a small distance, but close enough to hear her every word, close enough to see the pain etched on her face. "Tell me everything. That night. The pregnancy. Why you hit him. Don't leave anything out. Not one detail. Not one feeling. I need to understand. I need to know." She nodded, lifting her head, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red-rimmed and weary. She took a deep, shaky breath, as if gathering the strength from the cool night air. Her voice was low, hesitant at first, then gaining a quiet, desperate honesty as she began to weave the story of the years since their divorce, a narrative of struggle, fear, isolation, and a secret held so close to her heart it had threatened to consume her. She recounted the night before the divorce papers were signed with painstaking detail, the unannounced arrival at his old apartment, the shock on his face, the awkwardness, the overwhelming wave of sadness that had enveloped them both as they sat surrounded by packing boxes, a physical representation of the end of their life together. "We talked for hours, Michael," she began, her gaze distant, lost in the painful memories. "About everything. About how it all went wrong. About the good times, the bad times. About the pain we had caused each other and the pain of letting go. We opened that bottle of wine. Maybe two. We cried. So much crying. It was like weeping for the death of our marriage. And then it just happened." She paused, her voice trembling, her eyes meeting his, searching his face, perhaps, for a flicker of recognition, a shared memory that wasn't there. It was a moment of pure, raw vulnerability. Two broken people, clinging to each other in the dark, saying goodbye in the worst possible way. It wasn't love, Michael. It wasn't even desire in the way you might think. It was just a desperate, pathetic attempt to feel something other than the pain of finality. A mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I left before the sun came up, before we had to face the reality of it, the shame, the regret. She described discovering the pregnancy 6 weeks later, the shock, the disbelief, the utter terror that had gripped her. "My whole world just imploded again," she whispered, tears returning to her eyes, tracing paths through the dust and weariness on her cheeks. "I was already spiraling, Michael. The divorce was final. I lost my job. I was staying with my sister, feeling like a complete failure, trying to figure out where to go, who I was without us. Finding out I was pregnant with your baby, it felt like a cruel, cosmic joke. Like the universe was laughing at me, punishing me for my mistakes." She hugged Leo closer, her voice filled with the love that had sustained her through the darkness. "I thought about telling you, of course. Every single day, I thought about it. It was a constant battle in my head. I drafted emails I never sent. I wrote letters I tore up. I rehearsed phone calls in my head that I never made. But I couldn't do it. There were too many reasons why it felt impossible." "Why, Sarah?" Michael asked again, needing to understand the years of silence that had led to this moment, this devastation. "Why keep something like this from me? From his father? For 8 months? For 4 years? So many reasons, Michael," she said again, her voice laced with the pain of explaining choices she knew were flawed, but had felt necessary at the time. "First, there was the timing. You were finally moving on. I heard through mutual friends you were dating someone new. Emily. You seemed happy. Genuinely happy. More at peace than I had ever seen you. I felt like a toxic ghost from your past, a dark cloud. And dropping this bomb on you, just as you were starting to rebuild, Just as you were finding happiness, it felt like it would destroy everything you were working towards. I thought you'd hate me even more than you already did. I thought you'd think I was trying to trap you, or get back at you, or use a child as some kind of weapon. The narrative I built in my head was that telling you would only bring more pain, more chaos, more destruction to both our lives. She paused, her gaze distant, lost in the painful memories, the long nights spent agonizing over her decision. And honestly, Michael, I wasn't sure I could handle it. I was barely keeping myself afloat. Physically, emotionally, financially. I was terrified, pregnant, alone, with no real support system. The thought of involving you, of potential arguments about custody, about money, about the past mistakes that led us there, about who was to blame, it felt too overwhelming. I was drowning, Michael, truly drowning. And I felt like telling you would just pull us both under, that the weight of it would crush us both. I was also scared, Michael. Scared of your family's reaction. They never liked me. Scared of my own family's reaction. My parents, they were so disappointed in how our marriage ended. So relieved I was getting a fresh start. Telling them I was pregnant, unmarried, after just finalizing the divorce, it was another layer of shame, of failure, another thing they would be disappointed in me for. I felt like I had nothing left to give, nothing left to risk. She took a shaky breath, her voice gaining a quiet intensity as she continued, laying bare the raw reality of her life in the shadows. So I made the only decision I felt strong enough to make at the time, to do it alone, to leave the city, move somewhere quiet, where no one knew me, where I could just disappear and focus on surviving and protecting this little life growing inside me. I found a small, cheap apartment in a rough neighborhood. I got a terrible, minimum wage job that barely paid the bills. It was hard, Michael. So incredibly hard. There were days I didn't eat properly because I needed to make sure I had enough for baby supplies. Days I cried from pure exhaustion and crushing loneliness. Days I felt like giving up. There were moments I felt such despair, I didn't know how I would survive another hour. But then I would look at him. She trailed off, her voice thick with emotion as she gazed down at Leo, her anchor, her reason. He was everything. My little Leo. My reason to keep going. He was innocent in all of it, Michael. Pure, perfect, untainted by our mess. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, a raw, exposed vulnerability that stripped away the years of distance and resentment. And he started to look more and more like you. Every single day, the resemblance became more obvious, more undeniable. His eyes, his nose, his chin, it was you, Michael. People would comment. Friends I made, neighbors, even strangers in the grocery store. Oh, he looks just like his daddy. And my heart would ache, because his daddy didn't even know he existed. It felt wrong, Michael. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Like I was keeping him from a part of himself, keeping you from a part of your life, a part of your family, a child you had a right to know. She described the constant internal battle, the guilt, the longing to tell him, warring fiercely with the ingrained fear and the perceived impossibility of disrupting the seemingly perfect new life she saw him building from afar. When I saw the wedding announcement, it just brought everything to a head. She continued, her voice low but firm, a desperate resolve hardening her tone. Seeing your picture, Emily's picture, the announcement of your wedding, your future together. It was beautiful, Michael. It really was. It looked like everything you always wanted. But it also felt like a clock ticking down, a deadline I couldn't ignore. I knew I couldn't let you start a new life, a new family, a whole new chapter, without knowing about the son you already had. Leo is your family too, Michael. He's your son. I panicked. I didn't know how else to force the issue. I didn't have the courage to call, to write a letter. I was afraid you'd ignore me, or worse, deny it. I thought, seeing him, seeing how much he looks like you, seeing the undeniable truth, it would be the only way to make you listen, to make you understand. I gambled, Michael. I made a terrible, desperate, selfish gamble on your wedding day. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking about the scene, about the guests, about Emily's pain. I just wanted you to see him, to know, before it felt like it was too late, before you were completely out of reach, completely immersed in a life that had no room for your son. The timing was awful, Sarah, Michael said, stating the obvious. But the earlier anger had completely faded, replaced now by a profound sense of sorrow, guilt, and a dawning, horrifying understanding of the immense burden she had carried alone, the desperate circumstances that had driven her choices. "I know," she whispered, her voice full of regret, looking down at Leo's sleeping face, gently stroking his cheek. "There was no good time, I suppose. No easy way to drop a bomb like this. But your wedding day, it felt like the last possible moment before it would be too late, before your new life with Emily was completely set in stone without any room for Leo. It was a terrible judgment call. I'm so sorry, Michael, for ruining your day, for the pain it caused Emily. I never meant to hurt her. I wanted you to know about your son. It's caused a lot of pain," Michael said, his voice heavy, thinking of Emily's heartbroken face as she walked away, the sound of her muffled sobs. "A lot of damage. I don't know if my marriage will survive this." Sarah flinched, looking down, her gaze fixed on Leo, her face a mask of pain and regret. "I truly didn't mean for that to happen," she repeated softly, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt her." "I believe you," Michael said, and he did. He saw the deep lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, the weariness in her posture, the fragility beneath the surface, the profound love for Leo that was her only anchor. This wasn't the act of a vengeful ex-wife seeking destruction. It was the desperate, flawed, and ultimately heartbreaking action of a mother who had made incredibly difficult choices under immense pressure, who had carried a secret for too long, and who could no longer bear the weight of it alone. He looked at Leo again, his son, a physical manifestation of a forgotten night, a consequence he never knew he was facing. A tiny human being who was half him, half Sarah, a blend of their shared history, moving forward into a future he hadn't planned for, a future that now included him, whether he was ready or not. A small, innocent life caught in the crossfire of adult mistakes and long-held secrets. He reached out a hand, hesitantly, and gently touched Leo's soft cheek with his fingertip. The baby stirred slightly in his sleep, sighing, leaning unconsciously into the touch. A wave of emotion, powerful and overwhelming, washed over Michael. Guilt for the time lost, sorrow for the pain caused, fear of the unknown future, confusion over the missing piece of his memory, but also, undeniably, a fierce, protective surge he had never felt before. Fatherhood. It hit him with the force of a physical blow, soft as a baby's touch, but world-altering in its impact. This was his child, his son. A part of him he hadn't known was missing until this very moment. "He's beautiful, Sarah," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, a raw, unexpected tenderness overwhelming him. "Truly beautiful." A small, genuine smile, the first he had seen on her face that night, that reached her eyes, touched Sarah's lips. It was a smile of a mother, proud and loving, sharing her child with his father for the first time. "He gets that from you," she said softly. They sat in silence for a while longer, the quiet night air surrounding them, the gentle murmur of the fountain a soft backdrop to the immense, unspoken gravity of the moment. Michael felt a profound, irreversible shift occurring within him. The man who had walked into the reception, secure in his new life, oblivious to the past's lingering hold, the man who thought he had everything figured out, was gone forever. In his place was a man facing an unpredictable future, a man burdened by secrets he hadn't known he was keeping, a man who was now, undeniable and irrevocably, a father. His perfect edifice had crumbled, revealing a hidden history beneath. The test results confirmed it. Michael finally said, breaking the silence, needing to voice the certainty, to make it fully real, even though it felt utterly surreal. 99.99% probability. "He's mine, Sarah." Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting the dim lights of the courtyard, glistening with fresh tears. "I know. I felt it in my heart, from the moment I knew I was pregnant." "What happens now, Sarah?" Michael asked, the question looming vast, complex, and terrifying, encompassing not just their lives, but Leo's and Emily's. She looked at him, her gaze steady, returning his earlier vulnerability with her own fragile strength, her love for Leo shining through the weariness. That's up to you, Michael. I brought him to you because I felt you had a right to know. He has a right to know his father. I've managed on my own, and I can continue to. It's been incredibly hard, but I can do it. But I want him to have you in his life. If that's something you want. I don't want anything from you, Michael. Not money, not getting back together. Just acknowledge him. Be his father. Be present in his life. Help me give him the kind of life he deserves. The simplicity and profound weight of her request struck him deeply. Be his father. Help give him a good life. It was a daunting task, one he was utterly unprepared for, one that would redefine his entire existence, rewrite his future. But as he looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully in the stroller, his tiny hand curled near his face, saw the undeniable likeness, felt the pull in his gut. It felt like the most important thing in the world. I want that, Sarah, Michael said, his voice filled with a newfound conviction, a sense of purpose overriding the fear and confusion. The desire to be a father, to protect and provide for this child, surged within him, powerful and instinctive. He's my son. I want to be in his life. I want to get to know him. I want to be his father. I want to help you. Whatever he needs, whatever you need to give him a good life, I'll provide. They began to talk about the practicalities, the daunting details of integrating Michael into Leo's life. Visitation schedules, financial support, the legal steps needed to formalize paternity and establish agreements, how to navigate their relationship as co-parents, how to introduce the concept of a father to an 8-month-old who only knew his mother. It was overwhelming, complex, filled with potential pitfalls. But underneath the practical discussions lay a shared sense of purpose, a mutual commitment to the well-being of the small life sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms. They discussed lawyers, setting up formal agreements, ensuring everything was clear and legally sound, protecting Leo's future. Sarah spoke about her current living situation, the difficulties of affording a safe neighborhood, her worries about childcare while working a demanding job. Michael listened, his guilt heavy, determined to provide stability and security for his son and ease Sarah's burden, a burden he was only just beginning to comprehend. They talked about opening a joint account for Leo's expenses, setting up a college fund, ensuring he had health care. It was a rapid, dizzying plunge into the financial realities of parenthood he hadn't prepared for. The days that followed were an agonizing period of waiting. Waiting for Emily's response, waiting for the legal papers to be drawn up, waiting for the world to feel normal again, knowing it never would, not in the way he had understood normal before. Michael stayed in the sterile hotel room, unable to return to the apartment he had shared with Emily, the place that had represented their future, now filled with the ghosts of their shattered dreams. He sent Emily long emails, poured out his heart, explained everything again, expressed his profound regret and his deep, unwavering love for her, and his equally unwavering commitment to Leo. He received no reply. A few days later, a brief, formal email arrived from Emily's parents stating that Emily was taking an indefinite leave of absence from work and needed space and time away from everything to process what had happened, and that all communication regarding wedding arrangements and shared assets should be directed through their family lawyer. The finality of it hit him hard. Emily was gone, not just from the apartment, but potentially from his life entirely. He spoke to his own parents at length, spending hours on the phone, recounting the conversation with Sarah, trying to explain the incomprehensible gap in his memory. His mother, once she processed the initial shock and disbelief, became fiercely protective of Michael and surprisingly open, even excited, about the idea of a grandson. She peppered him with questions about Leo, asked for pictures constantly, offered to help in any way she could, childcare, financial help for Sarah, anything. His father, while still skeptical of Sarah's timing and motivations, couldn't deny Leo's powerful resemblance and ultimately accepted the truth with a gruff resignation. "He's blood, Michael," he'd said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Your son. We'll figure it out. We're your family. We stand by you. Both of you. And Leo. This unexpected acceptance from his often reserved father was a small comfort in the engulfing chaos. He grappled intensely with the forgotten night. He couldn't shake the feeling of that missing time, that blank spot in his memory. He revisited his old apartment building, stood outside, walked the streets of his old neighborhood, trying to conjure memories, searching for a clue, a detail, anything that could explain the blackout, the possibility that he had been physically intimate with Sarah without a clear recollection. He even considered talking to a therapist, exploring repressed memories, the psychological impact of the end of his first marriage, the stress he must have been under. The more he tried to piece it together, the more elusive and fragmented the memories became. The feeling of finality, the overwhelming weight of sadness, the taste of cheap wine on his tongue, Sarah's tears, his own exhaustion, the quiet click of the door closing as he left before dawn. Had he been that drunk? That emotionally numb? So lost in the pain of goodbye that his mind had simply refused to process anything further, effectively erasing a moment that held such profound consequences? The lack of a clear memory was terrifying, a gaping hole in his past that had exploded into his present with devastating force, a testament to the depth of his own pain and perhaps a shocking self-absorption he hadn't realized he possessed until now. He questioned his own reliability, his own character, his own sanity. What kind of man was he, truly, if he could forget something like that? Sarah and Michael began the delicate, awkward dance of integrating him into Leo's life. Their first few meetings were stiff, formal, filled with unspoken tension and the vastness of the years they had missed. They met in parks, on neutral ground, speaking in hushed tones while Leo played nearby. Sarah showed Michael how to hold Leo properly, how to feed him a bottle while supporting his head, how to change his diaper, mundane tasks that felt monumental and utterly foreign to Michael. He fumbled. He made mistakes. He felt awkward and unsure. But he learned, his love for Leo growing with each interaction, each shared smile, each tiny hand gripping his finger. Leo, initially wary of the new face, the strange voice, slowly began to accept Michael's presence, watching him with curious dark eyes, occasionally reaching out a tiny hand to touch his face or pull at his tie. The moment Leo first smiled directly at him, a wide, gummy, radiant expression of pure, innocent joy, Michael's heart swelled in his chest, a profound, undeniable connection solidifying within him, washing away some of the fear and doubt. This was his son, his reality. Meeting Emily again after receiving the lawyer's email was one of the hardest things he had ever done. He found her at her apartment, the packed boxes still looming, a stark reminder of a life they had planned that now seemed impossibly far away. She let him in, her face guarded, her eyes wary and filled with a deep, aching pain that mirrored his own. The silence in the apartment, once filled with their laughter and plans, was heavy, suffocating. She sat across from him in the living room, the same room where they had spent countless happy evenings, where he had proposed, a room now filled with the ghosts of their shared past and the uncertainty of their future. "Emily," he said, his voice soft, hesitant, "I got the test results. We had the lawyers draw up the initial agreements." He laid out the practical steps he was taking, the undeniable reality of Leo's paternity and his commitment to being a father. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her fingers twisting her simple gold wedding band, the one he had placed on her finger just days ago. "I saw the email from the lawyer," she whispered, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, which was more terrifying than anger or tears. "My parents forwarded it." "He's mine, Emily," Michael said, needing to say the words, even though they caused her pain. "Leo is my son. 99.99%. She didn't cry this time. She just nodded again, a slow, deliberate movement, her eyes lifting to meet his. They were filled with a deep, settled pain that went beyond the initial shock, a profound sorrow for the future that had been stolen, for the man she thought she knew. "I know," she said quietly. "I knew at the wedding. Seeing him, it was undeniable. And hearing Sarah's story about that night. I don't know if I believe it entirely. How you could forget, but seeing him, the resemblance is too strong. I am so sorry, Emily, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, the words inadequate to express the depth of his regret, his sorrow for the pain he had caused her, for the way he had shattered her world. For everything. For the pain, the shock, for ruining our day, for changing our future so completely. I never meant to hurt you. Not ever. Sorry doesn't fix this, Michael, she said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with a profound weariness. It doesn't unhappen the wedding. It doesn't make him not your son. It doesn't make me not feel fundamentally betrayed. Not just by the secret, but by the fact that you could be so unaware of your own life, your own actions, that something like this was possible. It makes me question everything, Michael. Everything you told me about your past, about being over Sarah, about being ready for us. If you could forget something like that, Wells don't I know? Wells could be out there. I know, he said, his voice heavy, accepting the validity of her fears, of her pain. I don't understand it myself, Emily. How that night could be such a blur. It feels like a failure, a blind spot I didn't know I had. But it happened. And he's here. He's my son. And I can't walk away from that. I have a responsibility to him now. And now what, Michael? She demanded, standing up and pacing, the quiet control starting to crack, her voice rising slightly, the pain giving way to anger, to frustration, to despair. What do you expect me to do? Just accept it? Welcome your son and his mother into our lives? Pretend like this is just a minor inconvenience in our perfect plan? A little hiccup we can just smooth over. I expect you to do whatever you need to do, Emily, he repeated, his voice gentle but firm, acknowledging the immense difficulty of the situation. I understand if this is too much. I understand if you can't see a future with me anymore. I know I've hurt you deeply, but I have a son, Emily. He is innocent in all of this. He is my responsibility. I want to be a father to him. That has to be my priority now. My commitment to him, to ensuring he has a good life, is unwavering. She stopped pacing, turning to face him, her eyes filled with a raw, agonizing vulnerability, her face a mask of pain and conflicting emotions. Your commitment to him, she whispered, the words laced with pain, with a heartbreaking accusation of shifting priorities. What about your commitment to me? To us? The life we promised each other? The future we were going to build together? Did that just disappear the moment you found out? That's what I meant, Emily, he said, standing and walking towards her slowly, cautiously, stopping a few feet away, respecting the emotional distance she had put between them. I want that life with you, more than anything. I love you, Emily, with my whole heart. But that life now includes Leo. It includes Sarah as his mother, as my co-parent. It will be complicated. It will be messy. It will not be the simple, perfect future we planned. It will be something else. Something harder, yes, but maybe something just as meaningful. I'm hoping, desperately hoping, that you can find a way to understand, to forgive, to see a path forward for us. One that includes him. One that includes all of this mess. She looked at him, tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The silence stretched between them, vast and heavy, filled with shattered dreams, unspoken fears, the ghost of their wedding day, and the monumental weight of the decision that lay before her. She loved him. He knew that, could see it in the pain in her eyes, in the way she still looked at him despite everything. But was love enough to overcome this? To build a future on the ruins of the past, a future that included a child he didn't know he had and the woman who had kept him secret, a future forever marked by the chaos of their wedding day? I don't know, Michael, she whispered again, her voice broken, the words barely audible, filled with a profound sadness. I don't know if I can. I need more time, more space, to think, to feel, to figure out if I can live with this. If I can live with him, and with her. It's too much. Their relationship settled into a state of agonizing limbo, a suspended animation between what was and what might never be. Emily continued living separately, needing the physical and emotional distance to process the earthquake that had shattered her life. They continued attending counseling sessions, a painful, often tear-filled process of digging through the layers of hurt, betrayal, anger, and the complex reality of their situation. Emily struggled fiercely with her emotions. The deep love she still held for Michael warring with her sense of betrayal, her jealousy of Sarah, her sadness and resentment for the future she had lost, for the life she had planned that was now gone forever. She grappled with the idea of accepting Leo into her life, a child who was a living, breathing, smiling reminder of Michael's past, a child she hadn't planned for, hadn't carried, hadn't chosen, a child whose very existence felt like a betrayal. Her parents remained a constant source of pressure and influence, openly questioning Michael's character and advising Emily to protect herself, to cut her losses, to leave a situation they saw as irreparably tainted by scandal and deceit. Their skepticism towards Sarah was unwavering, viewing her solely as the woman who had ruined their daughter's wedding and threatened their daughter's future happiness. Meanwhile, Michael poured his energy, his fear, his guilt, and his burgeoning love into fatherhood. He visited Leo regularly, multiple times a week, navigating the delicate, often awkward, transitions with Sarah. He established a routine, learning the rhythms of his son's life, his feeding schedule, his nap times, the things that soothed his cries, the toys that made him giggle. He learned to be a father, the mundane tasks of care, the patience required for a fussy afternoon, the surprising physical strength needed to carry a growing baby, the overwhelming joy of a shared smile, a tiny hand reaching out to touch his face, a small body fitting perfectly against his chest. He fumbled, he made mistakes, dressing Leo backwards, forgetting a diaper, mixing formula incorrectly, but he learned, his confidence as a father growing with each interaction, his love for Leo deepening into a fierce, protective bond that was both terrifying and exhilarating in its intensity. He baby-proofed a corner of his apartment, set up a crib, bought clothes, toys, and books, creating a space for his son and his life, a tangible act of commitment to this unexpected reality. He and Sarah navigated the complex waters of co-parenting, a relationship born out of necessity and bound by a shared love for their son. Their interactions were purely focused on Leo, a fragile alliance built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to their child's well-being. They communicated daily about Leo's health, his schedule, his developmental milestones. They made joint decisions about doctors, food, activities. There were moments of tension, disagreements over parenting styles. He needs a thicker blanket. Are you sure he's warm enough? But they managed to find a rhythm, prioritizing Leo's needs above their own complicated history or lingering feelings. Sarah seemed less burdened now. The weight of her secret lifted, though the challenges of raising a young child, even with Michael's support, remained. She was grateful for Michael's financial support, his presence, his genuine love for Leo, acknowledging that her decision, however flawed, had at least led to her son knowing his father. She slowly began to trust Michael, seeing his consistent effort and genuine devotion to Leo. Michael began to introduce Leo to his life beyond his immediate family. His parents, once they fully processed the news, became doting grandparents, showering Leo with affection and spoiling him affectionately. His mother eagerly offered to babysit, thrilled to have a grandson, her initial shock giving way to proud grandmotherhood. His father, while still sometimes making gruff comments about Sarah's timing, undeniably softened around Leo, his stern demeanor melting into a warm smile whenever his grandson was near. His friends, initially shocked and curious about the scandal of the wedding, gradually adjusted to the new reality, welcoming Leo into their gatherings, offering support to Michael as he navigated fatherhood and his relationship with Emily. Michael found himself talking about Leo constantly, sharing pictures and anecdotes, proud of his son, despite the messy circumstances of his arrival. He felt a shift in his social life. Some superficial acquaintances drifted away, uncomfortable with the drama, while his true friends rallied around him, offering unconditional support. He navigated the legal process of formalizing paternity and establishing child support and visitation agreements. It was a stark, practical reminder of the permanence of the situation, a legal framework for the emotional chaos of his life. He met with lawyers, reviewed documents, signed papers that officially acknowledged him as Leo's father and outlined his responsibilities. It was a necessary step, grounding the emotional reality in legal certainty. He also dealt with the lingering fallout at work. The scandal of his wedding had spread through the office grapevine, leading to awkward questions, hushed whispers, and subtle changes in how he was perceived professionally. Some colleagues were understanding and supportive. Others were judgmental or gossipy. He focused on his work, pouring his energy into his projects, proving his competence and professionalism despite the very public personal turmoil. He refused to let the scandal define him professionally. Months bled into a year, then 2 years after the disastrous wedding day. The memory of the shattered ballroom, the shocked faces, the agonizing conversation with Sarah by the fountain, and Emily's heartbroken departure remained seared into his memory, a defining moment that had forever altered the course of his life. Leo grew from an infant into a curious, active toddler, his personality blossoming, cheerful, determined, full of boundless energy and an infectious giggle. He walked, he talked in simple sentences, he explored the world with a fearless curiosity that both thrilled and terrified Michael. Michael was there for many of his milestones, coaching him as he took his first wobbly steps, listening intently as he strung together his first sentences, reading him bedtime stories, teaching him to kick a ball in the park, patiently answering his endless questions. He learned the profound, unconditional love of a parent, a love that existed independently of the circumstances of Leo's conception, a love that was powerful enough to overshadow the pain and confusion of the past. He learned that fatherhood was messy, exhausting, challenging, and the most rewarding thing he had ever experienced. Emily's journey continued, a long, arduous process of healing and decision-making. The counseling sessions provided a space for her to unpack her pain and rebuild her sense of self, separate from the identity of being Michael's wife with a planned future. She slowly began to separate her feelings from Michael from the anger and resentment about the situation with Sarah and Leo. She spent more time with Leo, tentative at first, then with a growing, cautious warmth. Seeing the bright, cheerful, innocent child, seeing Michael as a dedicated, loving, and genuinely happy father, began to chip away at her resentment. It was not an easy process. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, arguments fueled by lingering hurt and unresolved trust issues. The shadow of the ruined wedding and the presence of Sarah as a co-parent loomed large over their attempts at reconciliation. Their future remained profoundly uncertain. The packed boxes in Emily's apartment lingered for a long time, a physical symbol of the unresolved tension, the life they had planned that was still on hold, or perhaps permanently derailed. They weren't living together again, weren't actively planning a second wedding. Their relationship existed in a state of fragile hope, a possibility they were both tentatively exploring, day by day, conversation by difficult conversation, unsure if the foundation could ever be strong enough to support the weight of their complex reality. Emily loved Michael. He knew that. He felt it in the moments of tenderness they still shared, in her willingness to keep trying, even when it was painful. But she didn't know if she could fully accept the unpredictable, complicated reality of his life, a reality that would forever include his ex-wife and their child, a reality that had begun with such devastating public chaos. Michael understood. He had shattered her trust, destroyed the simple, uncomplicated future they envisioned. All he could do was continue to be honest, present, and committed, unequivocally committed to his son, Leo, and deeply committed to Emily, if she could find a way to move past the pain and build a new kind of future with him. He accepted that he might have lost her forever, but he had to try. He owed her that much. His wedding day, meant to be a neat, happy ending to one chapter and a simple, joyous beginning to another, had instead ripped open the past with brutal force and catapulted him into a future far more complex, far more challenging, and ultimately, far more meaningful than he could have ever anticipated. He had lost the illusion of a perfect, uncomplicated life, but he had gained something immeasurably precious: a son. A living, breathing, laughing part of himself he hadn't known was missing until that moment in the ballroom. And in the messy, complicated, often painful process of integrating Leo into his world, of navigating co-parenting with Sarah, of fighting for future with Emily, he was discovering a new definition of family, forged not in simplicity and perfect plans, but in resilience, honesty, love, forgiveness, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how painful, and build something new from the ruins. The journey was far from over, the path ahead uncertain, but as he held Leo's hand, walking through the park on a sunny afternoon, listening to his son's happy chatter, watching his face light up at the sight of a bird or a passing dog, he knew that despite everything, despite the pain, the regrets, the shattered dreams, he wouldn't trade this unexpected, challenging, beautiful life for the simple, oblivious one he had planned. He was a father now, standing on the edge of a complex, evolving future, ready to face whatever came next, with his son's tiny hand holding onto his. Thank you for joining me on this long and immersive journey through love, loss, secrets, and the unexpected path of fatherhood. If you were drawn into Michael's story and wish to explore more complex and captivating narratives that delve deep into human emotion, the challenges of relationships, the weight of the past, and the surprising ways life unfolds, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your subscription helps support the creation of stories like this one.